من الآمنين الفرحين المستبشرين بالجنة الذين لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا يا صاحب الهم إن الهم منفرد يا صاحب الهم إن الهم منفرد أبشر بخير أبشر بخير أبشر بخير فإن الفارج الله يحدث بعد العسر ميسرتان لا تجزعن فإن الصانع الله إذا إن الذي يكشف البلوى هو الله والله ما لك غير الله من أحد فحسبك الله في كل لك الله والله ما لنا غير الله من أحد فحسبنا فحسبنا الله في كل لنا الله سبحان من أيقظ العيون بعد المنام سبحان الملك العزيز العلام سبحان من أذهب عنا الليل وأتانا بالصباح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
على الخيمة عند الخيمة عشان نازلين مباشرة.
رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الصلاة خير من النوم. الصلاة خير من النوم. الله أكبر اللهم صل على سيدنا
لن تبكى.
يلا
دور عليك شاهد.
كرة تزيد صح؟
حمادة
لا ولك مش قصدك على امك ليه؟ يلا خد صورة ها هي طلع قال لك وقف يا حماده يلا يا سيدي طلعوا هنا شباب
تموا
تمينا سيدي ها
يلا
يلا جاهزين
الله
سمرونا يا زلمه. شو يلا
وينك؟ خلاص تمام تمام شوف تمام وين يا زلمه وين مصور
يلا لا يلا الو
الأقصى
لبيك يا أقصى. لبيك يا أقصى. لبيك يا أقصى.
طلع في فلان هذا. هلا اذا صرت ضائق مصور اي سماح كان مكتب تصنيف كان بيقول سماح
التسهيل.
حمزة.
وين؟
تعال عاد
انت شايف شو في قدامك؟
انا طالع على الكوبري بس. وينكم؟ تعال كريم.
يا اخي يلا اوه
كل زمان كل زمان شوية اللي كان
مش مهم.
بفوت هلا
هيك 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 هيك.
والله ما في حد طلع يعني في الأقصى هي ولا في هذا اللي بتشوفوه على التلفزيون هذا صور قديمة قبل سنة.
هذه ما شايفتها على التلفزيون كل ما يوصل عندك بتروح الصورة انت مباشر ده هيك على الجزيرة كل ما يوصل عندك بتروح الصورة هم بيحطوا يعني بيحطوا غزة بيحطوا والله بتفهم
هاي هون عبيد هاي هون.
So let's take the first item first. recommend a number of items. In general, I said Palestine is something and it is with a number of key issues that we have to confront as we speak about Palestine. Unfortunately, talking about in any way or shape without coming to grips with real understanding that Palestine is colonized first by European project that was thinking of how to make control over Near East, Palestine, on the territories, and as Great Britain stated that dominated Palestine, Egypt, region that was actually was thought of as part of the protection plan to protect British colony India, which was the treasure and really the prize of the colonial period. Understand that Britain impoverished and led to destruction in India. Whatever we see in India today is but a consequence of years of colonization, literally draining $50 trillion plus from the Indians to uplift and develop Great Britain. And as such, the British strategy focused on securing trade routes, and especially as the Suez Canal came into operation. Trade, Great Britain trade, European trade was passing through the Red Sea and into the Suez Canal and then trade into Europe itself. So Palestine, colonization of Egypt, directly connected to trade and directly connected to British access. So the second part of this is make sure that the Ottoman Empire is divided and devoured by the various European powers. France, England, Russians, at the time Tsarist Russia. So there was a concerted effort to claim as much of the territories that belonged to the Tsar. And this was again the European having been defeated by the relations to the Crusades by the beginning of the 13th to the mid-13th century. And now European powers have other ways to arrive, to penetrate, to claim the Holy Land, which is again one of the major focus areas for European powers. So, all you need to say that Palestine was first colonized by the British and included in the sites of that resulted in the maps that today see Middle East that divided the region. And within the post-World War I plans was the issuing of the Balfour Declaration. Let me first address this Palestinian Palestine was not occupied and colonized in the United States. Palestine was colonized by the British beginning in 1917, December 1917, when the British occupied Palestine, and then through their maneuvering in the Paris Peace Treaty or peace agreements in post-World War I, were able to cement and the Sykes-Picot Agreement into custodian controlling funds, not only over Palestine, but Jordan, Iraq, as well as having already had considerable sway over the Gulf region, and where the base of power behind the ascension of the South into power. So, 1917 is when Palestine was colonized, so we're literally with about 104 years in the process of colonization and dispossession of Palestine. It is through the British issuing a self-funded declaration that Palestine became transformed slowly into a Zionist state that includes Great Britain, incubating Zionism, managed to increase settlements and settlers in Palestine, and we're still speaking today of settlements and settlers. Britain gave facilitated the massive center of community coming to Palestine, changing the demographics, because we would not have a settlement colonial project without changing demographics. So from a 3 to 4% population, Jewish population in Palestine, in 1948 being almost 85%, increasing as a result of the British incubating and facilitating the colonization project. In 1948, this comes into being immediately adopted by the Western powers, who already have actually managed or adopted Zionism and adopted Israel as their success story. Listen to anyone who is European political leadership and constitution. Every once in a while they might express some doubt of relations with Palestinians, but it's a sympathy that speaks to the state oil because Palestine and embracing of settler colonialism is a feature that continues to come down the success pattern for Europeans because they see Israel as their success story in really expelling, forcing Jews out of Europe and giving them a colony that would immediately link itself to European power, seeing that there's a benefit of money. That's where we have in 1948 just a shift from European colonization into direct Zionist colonization. In that, I mentioned or I'm going to call the Nakba, which is something that we are commemorating, but as I don't like to say commemorating because it's something that is past or considered affirming the Nakba in Palestine, and we celebrate the most important modern historical event that continues to unfold today. The Nakba resulted in the expulsion of ethnic cleansing of close to 700,000 Palestinians from their land, 75% of their property, emptying and inflating urban centers in the coastal regions of Palestine. Some 531 villages were erased and ethnic cleansed. And it is that ethnic cleansing that makes Israel a built state. Ethnic cleansing, genocide, that is taking place in Palestine. Now, many of us have worked with the question of Palestine, that represents West, Fajr prayer, Fajr prayer by Imam Al-Aqsa Mosque. Pray after reading very much. So again, ethnic cleansing, which for somebody like Benny Morris actually labeled as being a justifiable ethnic cleansing. In one statement that normative among many Israelis is that in order for you to make an omelet, you have to crack some eggs. Therefore, these were the Palestinian eggs that were cracked in order to produce the Zionist omelet. The Zionist omelet still unfolded. So this is for us. Palestine's settler colonization by Zionism is a European American Zionist project. It actually presents, from the Zionist perspective and the European American, is a success story. It is also claiming Palestine as the temple for Western civilization. Palestine belongs to the Palestinian indigenous population. One or the other. This is a message intertwined European powers, European interests, and as such, we have to actually understand what that means. So when I say that we need to understand this would the quicker we understand this, the possibly the clearer we have in attempting to try to actually deal with the consequences of settler colonialism. So I put on 22 different points a couple of days ago to relate to what Palestine and what we are confronting. So the first point is for us to understand is again that Israel and Zionism are the last settler colonial project to be commissioned by Western powers in a scheme to divide and rule a region that they have economic, political, cultural, and also theological interest. So that's one. Second point, promising a homeland to European Jews was motivated by Europe and Great Britain, France as well, colonial designs, as well as deep anti-Semitism that existed in Europe. So it's not actually separate or divorced from it. It's actually part of the rationale for it. Third, Zionism accepted to be a junior partner in a European settler colonial project that dispossesses the Palestinians while relocating European Jews from Europe into Palestine. So in essence, you dispossess the Palestinians while you actually are, in essence, not forcing Jews out, but you're actually causing them to relocate to Palestine because you say that Europe is not a place for the Jewish person. This is what we call the Jewish question in European history. So Europe solved their racist and anti-Semitic Jewish question by creating a division among Jews and Muslims that centers Europe's role as the custodian of civilization and the diplomatic saviors of the region. So we have to knock on London's 10 Downing Street, we have to go to Paris, we have to go to the United States, countries that have acted from deep anti-Semitic worldview and continue at least also utilize anti-Semitism in trying to locate their vision of the future. So this is a very important item in terms of item 4. Item 5, Great Britain implemented Zionism in Palestine to secure the Suez Canal and trade routes to India, while also thinking through a religious vision rooted in facilitating Jesus' second coming. So this is what rationalized Great Britain, also the evangelical right here in the United States, this notion of forcing the hands of God, that they want to think for God, they want to act as God rather than letting God being God and not actually intervene in any aspect of the historical development. Six item, Europe's role was inherited by the United States after World War II, which adopted Zionism as a junior partner and became a key functioneer state during the Cold War. So that's where Israel actually begins to gain its muscle, military, intelligence, and otherwise. Seven, U.S. motivation was for access to oil, countering Arab nationalism, Arab socialism, and any other indigenous movement seeking self determination, sovereignty, and real end of colonial intervention in the post colonial period. So the United States acted for its own interest. That's why we have to look at their intervention in Iran with the Mossadegh overthrow of the Mossadegh, their work and attempt and successfully so to derail Nasser's policies and approach, disrupting the unity that was about to emerge, which emerged for a while, and we could critique parts of it between Egypt, Syria, and then also pressuring Iraq not to enter into this alliance, and then also entangling in again in a war in Yemen, not the current war, but the war in the 1960s, which also brought Saudi Arabia and Egypt into a proxy war that centered again on preserving monarchies while trying to derail, and confront nationalist forces at the time. Now, I'm very critical because during that period also that Muslim groups and organizations aligned with themselves with the monarchies as a way to try to preserve or maintain their interests at the expense of everything else. And during the Cold War, they made also that same deal. So you're not going to find me sugarcoating the groups and organizations that made a rotten deal. And the deal that they made, again, continues to unfold as we speak. Item 8 in this thesis or this ideas that we need to contemplate, Christian evangelists struck a partnership with Zionism and Israel. And we use it, we're seeing it here in the United States, using speculative theology and a religious discourse that embraced empire, capitalism, and war, which likewise viewed supporting Israel as a stepping stone to Jesus' second coming. So when I talk about the evangelical right, why is it that the evangelical right in the United States, why is it gung-ho behind Israel? Why, let's say, somebody like Philip Hagee, a major evangelist, right, that goes around, fundraise, and adopted Israel. It's definitely not for the love of Jews, because his is coming from a theological perspective where he believed that Jesus' second coming will result in 2/3 of the Jews being killed and 1/3 will be converted to Christianity. But in this, it's a marriage of convenience, or actually I always describe it as being a shotgun wedding that have been constructed for the Zionists. This is a marriage of convenience where they could count on the large Christian coalition, evangelical coalition in the United States to support Israel, right or wrong, and mobilize their efforts to continue to maintain the uninterrupted support and pressure Congress, Senate, presidents time and time again to provide Israel with every need that it wants, because it's looked at from a theological perspective, right? And in essence, in here, one might see some of the liberal Christian forces that might also maybe not looking at it from a favoring war, conflict, and wanting the second coming. But in here also, they continue to operate within an atmosphere, a theological atmosphere that makes contesting this basic pillar very difficult, and which also has the effect of silencing Palestinian Christians, because Palestinian Christians become their own Christians. That the fact that they lived with Muslims, continue to live with Muslims, and they see each other in a community that of different faith creates a problem. In essence, they need to be re-educated, the Palestinian Christians. That's again from the evangelists and some of also the liberal parts of the Christian world. If anything, that Palestine does not belong to the Palestinian Christians themselves. It belongs to Western Christianity. And if anything, the Palestinian Christians, in essence, their racial marker of being Arab often actually takes precedent over the fact that they are Christian. So, and this is some of the racism that you see also developed within the Christian understandings relative to Palestine. So, item 9, here we have the destruction of Palestine, invasion of parts of the Arab world, continued material and environmental exploitation is rationalized through the most despicable deployment of religious extremism that stokes war and destruction. So, in essence, the Jesus, as the Prince of Peace, becomes the instrument of war and destruction, and you're up on to the races on this, as if Jesus was a salesperson for the military-industrial complex, selling weapons right and left, waiting and agitating for Armageddon. So again, this is what we are dealing with here. Item 10, silence in the US and Europe is not because they don't see what is underway. On the contrary, they see and consider Israel and Zionism as the success story and the needed prize to bring forth the only true civilization, i.e., the European white supremacist type of civilization, which sees no other civilization having actually standing in the world. So I would tell you the following, that every foreign embassy in Israel have clear report of what is taking place. They will have clear report about the settlers attacking Palestinians. They would have reports about these thugs that are marching in Jerusalem and attacking Palestinians and saying death to the Arabs. They would have people that actually would write these reports and lift it from each of these embassies to their foreign offices, foreign secretary offices, whether the United States or foreign secretary office in London, Secretary of State in the United States, and it has details information. Once it hits the political appointees, then the priorities and the overarching long-term commitment take precedent over any other consideration. So again, we often sign these petitions, we ask for consideration, human rights, and so on and so forth. But we need to understand what type of landscape we are working with in order for us not to actually fall prey to actually misdiagnostic of what is the circumstances that we are facing. So it is not because they don't know. It is because they know that they are culprit in actually allowing Israel to continue with this human rights violation, that they are continue to extend weapons sales, continue to provide it with all what is needed at the expense of the Palestinians. Item 11, which I say that there is only one true civilization as far as Eurocentric worldview. It says Arab, Christian, and Muslims are not included in this vision of the true and only civilization. So this is very important. Arab, Christians, and Muslims are not included in the vision of the true and only civilizations. While the Jews in Israel are expected to either convert to Christianity, and those who refuse will be killed when Jesus returns. So Arab Christians, they might be what you call rescued in terms if they convert to Western Christianity. Muslims, either they convert to Western Christianity, right, which is again, I am here not critiquing Christianity per se again, but the instrumentalization of theology, instrumentalization of this religious ethos as an instrument of war, of domination, of destruction, of negating people that actually have lived and possibly have been where Jesus traversed and Jesus walked in Palestine. So again, Arab Christians and Muslims are not included. And Jews, in essence, are only expected to convert. 2/3 of them are actually 1/3 expected to convert in this distorted, speculative theological that is being instrumentalized through political directives and political means. 12. Palestinians are facing in here the United States, Europe, Israel, and post-colonial Arab Muslim client states. So let me repeat this so we understand what the Palestinians are facing. Palestinians are facing the United States, meaning the United States political elite, Europe, European political elite, Israel with all its settlers, all its full spectrum, right, left, and center, post-colonial Arab Muslim client states, meaning Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, Mauritania, and a whole host of other states if they don't have direct, open normalization, collaboration. They are actually definitely doing this behind closed doors. And therefore, the Palestinians are facing this cluster of powers that are acting upon him. I didn't also add Jordan as well as a country that has been one of the major protecting states for Israel from its inception, signing a recognition of Israel's right as far back as 1922 when Transjordan was put into paper by the British. Right? So let me say it. Palestinians are facing U.S. political elite with its superpower might. It's it is facing European political elite. It's facing Israel, right, left, and center, post-colonial Arab Muslim client states. And the Muslim Arab client states who owe their current positions of power and security to being co-partners in the modern vision for the region and the globe, meaning a post-colonial dependent state that is committed to privatization, opening its market economy to be dominated by multinational corporate interests, having the IMF, World Bank, and all these financial institutions really manage and regulate every part of the country. More importantly, that many of the countries that have massive oil deposits and natural gas, their role is to funnel all this money into US and Western economies, and that's how you maintain the colonial citizenry in the global north in a state of continued benefit from the post-colonial world. So the cartography of power, economy, domination, and control has not changed, and therefore this is what the Palestinians are facing. 13. Item 13. Zionism and Israel, born out of Europe colonial designs and anti-Semitism, ended up embracing the racial and Eurocentric views of the world, which included positing a subhuman status for Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and interestingly enough, toward Eastern and African Jews as well. So Israel actually is committed itself to embracing Eurocentric views of the world, which looks at the Arab as a subhuman, meaning racially inferior, accepting a racial matrix that puts the Palestinians to be in subhuman category. The Arabs are subhuman. The Muslims are in subhuman category, as well as Eastern Jews within Zionism and Israel. So that's very important for us to understand that we have an active racial matrix that is actually in operation in Israel. Item 14. Once Zionism and Israel drank what I call the Kool-Aid of Western and Eurocentric power and racial epistemology, or epistemic, the way of knowing, then it was only a natural path toward genocide of the Palestinians, violence, ethnic cleansing, and transfer. They reproduce European methods perfected on the indigenous communities. So when Israel is looking and talking to its counterparts in the West, they're talking the same game. They're talking about the same game of genocide. the genocide of the indigenous population in the Americas, the genocides in Australia, the genocide in New Zealand, the genocide that is taking place in the Amazon jungles right now by multinational corporations that unleashing their economic power and environmental destruction and causing the death and mayhem visited upon indigenous communities that are living in the Amazon valley, in the Amazon jungle, to try to transform and commodify the rainforest in order for it to be producing more meat for people that are so overweight that they don't need another hamburger or another piece of meat to fulfill their need. So in this sense, when Israel is speaking to them, they're speaking of the same term. What can you talk to the British about, right? Like, you really are going to speak to the British who have not yet to apologize to the colonizations that they have visited upon India and the famine that killed millions, that was done in essence for shifting resources to Great Britain. And what are you going to speak about to European powers that have yet to apologize, yet to begin to rectify the effects of the colonization of Africa? Is Belgium all of a sudden going to reconcile itself to the destruction and the resources that it had gleaned massively from the Congo? Or is Europe still, even in the post-apartheid South Africa, the changes that they have brought to South Africa blacks are still economically depressed in the same economic viewpoint, the same economic positioning that they were in apartheid? Maybe there's some improvement, and then you have, white settlers complaining that they're losing what they have, their land, and they don't feel secure in their own country. Those are some fundamental questions that European powers have not actually are not ready to answer. So when they speak to Israel, they're speaking on the same term. They're actually part of the same country club of genocide. Colonization and settler colonization is structured on genocide. And so as we work to try to remedy and challenge this, we have to do a number of things simultaneously. It's not enough for us to complain about Israel. We have to actually also decolonize European thoughts, European mindset, European worldview, American worldview, American mindset, the whole notion of exceptionalism, the whole notion that we have a right to control the world. That is part and parcel, which is a very difficult task. And it's not very easy, because we're speaking about, why can't you see that the Palestinians are being killed and oppressed? Why can't we see that the United States, we have an open season on black men in the streets, black women? They don't feel safe, right? So this is history is an interconnected chain, that you cannot only touch one chain without actually touching the other. So while I'm dealing with Palestine, we have to understand that these are series of actions that are interconnected. You deal with colonialism, once you peel, again, it's like you're peeling a head of onion. Every time you peel, it's just like the smell gets to be intense, and you actually, literally, your tears become rivers flowing every time you peel one layer after the other of the onion. So we're dealing with the colonization and the onion of colonization, the onion of settler colonialism. And it's an insult to compare it to the onion, because the onion is actually healthy and it gives you good taste for your salad, for your food, and so on. But this is just for me as an analogy to think about what we're dealing with. Right? So Zionism and Israel drank the Kool-Aid of Western and Eurocentric power and racial epistemology. And it was only natural path toward genocide of the Palestinians, violence, ethnic cleansing, transfer, taking their home. Maybe some of you watched the small segment of Yaqub, who's saying to a Palestinian woman, if I don't steal your house, someone else will. Now just think of the indigenous Native Americans. If some of the settlers who went out took over these lands, if we don't take it, right, we're British settlers, well, the Dutch might, or the French, or the Louisiana Purchase, right, vast lands. Okay, so these are interconnected. So Israel is a continuation rather than an exception. So they reproduce European methods perfected on the indigenous communities, and that has to be understood, right? 15th, and I want you to actually think about this. The United Nations and international law represent colonial legalism for me. The United Nations and international law represent colonial legalism for me. That elevates the right of colonial powers and the global north over the rights of the colonized indigenous population. Palestine and Palestinians are victims of the international institution, victims of the colonial international institution. The League of Nations was set up to guarantee the rights of colonized states, even though that supposedly Woodrow Wilson, who fought and asserted the principle of self-determination, but simultaneously adopted the Balfour Declaration, as well as being also buddy-buddy domestically in the United States with the KKK, having what you call adopted and embraced their racial view and considered them as being part of the protective of the nation. So much so that the Birth of a Nation film was actually previewed at the White House. So there's a long history, as well as turning regressive measures inside the United States at the time were rising labor movement and so on. So again, one has to critique international law, international institutions, and one can critique the United Nations Security Council. The countries that sit with the veto power today have been the primary violators of international law without exception, right? Okay, so let's count them down. For those, maybe it's a lesson in international relations. United States invaded Vietnam, had a war in Korea. Vietnam War was a trumped up causality, illegally, firebombed and carpet bombed Cambodia, intervened in all of Latin American countries, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Panama, Haiti, Colombia, Chile, right? It also had intervened in the Middle East, in Lebanon, intervened in North Africa as well, intervened in low intensity, if not direct intensity, in Zaire, in Angola war, supported and continued to stand with South African apartheid till the last dying days. Right, so the United States, and most recently, for those who actually maybe don't want to have a long history lesson, the invasion of Iraq was illegal. Invading a sovereign state and taking the president and President Saddam Hussein and putting him on a trial and hanging him, that is in total violation of international law. If we still, pay attention, it's a law that is done, carried out as a stick to be used as an instrument of imperial power. And then you speak about the invasion of Afghanistan, the continued involvement on and off with Syria, the bombing of Yemen, the involvement in Libya and the war in Libya. So the United States having the veto power in the United Nations to be the custodian of international law. Again, if you just have, now we speak about Russia also being on the having the veto power, while Russia has sometimes acted to try to placate and contend with the United States, but it also has its own interventionist, its own approach to engage in parts of the world to pursue its own interest at the expense of population. Uh, uh, Great Britain has the veto power as the ultimate colonial power. Actually, I think Great Britain and France, just on the side, two countries that have devoured and colonized a vast part of the world, especially Africa, if not other parts of the world, they should not be in the business of sitting in any table that discusses international law. They actually should have a permanent timeout. You know how we like when you have kids that are acting out to give them timeout. Great Britain should not be custodian of anything pertaining to international law. In anything, they have to what you call have like maybe 7 generations down of repentance, and that is still not enough to the destruction they have visited upon the globe, which continues to be the case because every time you look at the conflict in the global south, including Palestine, Kashmir, or the borders in different parts of the world, you will actually have to go back to Great Britain or France in order to decipher, and then you get the Belgian and the Dutch into the mix in order to understand what is going on. And behind of that, you'll still see the natural resources that has been at the core of both British, French, Dutch, uh, earlier Portuguese, Spanish, Belgium, and then that now the United States with its multinational corporations. So that's again international law is represent colonial legalism that elevates the right of colonial powers and the global north over the rights of colonized indigenous population. Palestine and Palestinians are victims of international institutions and major powers who oversee this edifice that is called international law and international institutions. 16. What is happening in Palestine and Al-Quds today, Jerusalem, it is what is intended and planned, and not because Zionism and Israel lost their moral way. There is no moral way for settler colonialism other than genocide and transfer. It is constitutive, it is foundational. Settler colonialism is structured around genocide and transfer, with violence being constitutive element. Violence is a foundational element and not merely incidental. So Israel is not responding to Palestinian violence. Israel as a settler colonial project is structured on violence. You cannot have a settler colonial project without violence. Every moment of the indigenous population is vested with violence. It is violence to the core, it's violence to the bone, meaning that Palestinians as a society is experiencing settler colonialism violence day in and day out. The oxygen that is we breathe is vested with violence. The roads we drive is vested with violence. The books that we have to read are vested with violence. The license plate that we put on our car is vested with violence. The ID card that we have to carry is vested with violence. The permits to go and visit, whether from one town or the other, or to come from outside Palestine to come to visit, is vested with violence. And to see the Israeli troops marching into Al-Aqsa Mosque sanctuary and stepping with their feet, their despicable feet that are going inside the mosque, destroying some of the property, destroying some of the windows, some of the glass, shooting rubber bullets, beating medical staff, beating women, grabbing old and young, smashing some people's heads while they're praying on the rocks, as we saw some just yesterday in the live broadcast. All of this is not incidental. It is what is part and parcel of a settler colonial project, and the Palestinians have experienced it from the British and continue with it with the Zionism. I don't date Palestine's colonization in 1948. Again, it's 1917 with the British. And the British actually wreaked havoc in Palestinian society. The 1928-29 period, which saw massive mobilization, the British actually hanged Palestinians who resisted British settler colonialism. And then in 1936, we have a major uprising in Palestine. It's a Thawra al-Arabiya, by the Arab Revolt of 1936 for 3 years. And the British unleashed massive power against the Palestinians. House demolition, the British did it. Air bombardment, the British did it. Bombing civilian targets, the British did it. Arresting and rounding up mass number of individuals, the British did it. Collective punishment, the British did it. Sending to exile Palestinians, the British did it. Disrupting labor organizing, British did it. Disrupting Palestinian businesses, the British did it. In collaboration and cooperation with Zionist forces at the time. So one has to understand that this is what the Palestinians experience. So that's item 16 for those who are still with me on the numbering. Item 17. The Palestinian Authority is a function of the colonial structure and are trusted as native leaders to keep the indigenous Palestinian population under control and protect the privileges, power, and domination of the settler colonial power, Israel. They are merely paid employees in a settler colonial enterprise. Right? Now, this has to be understood that Israel, as a result of the first uprising, before 1987, Israel had its own unique, what you call, colonial projects that they wanted to dominate and control the Palestinian population in the West Bank and Gaza with total control, so on. The first uprising, the Intifada of 1987, completely transformed and altered the power relations and control. For the first time, Palestinians inside Palestine were actually broke the psychological barrier with Israel, with the Israeli forces, with the settler colonial forces, and no longer had the fear, which is a major commodity in maintaining control and domination, collapsed. So Israel resorted to opening the negotiations, not with the Palestinians inside the territories, but to actually open negotiations with the Palestinians abroad, the PLO at the time, and that the PLO was at the lowest level of its power, and in essence, the PLO accepted to negotiate away the right of its people, to the land, the rights of its people to self-determination, the rights of the Palestinians to have a say, for the right to be leaders to represent those people. So in essence, it is a signing for a seat, a power seat, that is completely vacated of any meaning of power or any meaning of representations for the Palestinians. And in this sense, we got into the dilemma where we resorted back, or Israel got back into classical settler colonial project, where you always entice a segment of the colonized elite to actually administer your security structure and oversee the native population with the eye toward protecting the colonizer against the colonized. And this is precisely what happened. And in the meantime, they get some sweetened deals and benefits as a result of this relationship. So they are, in essence, not to protect the Palestinians. They're not a security for the Palestinians. They're securing Israel from the Palestinians. This is the only way for us to understand that today, that some of the Palestinian Authority forces were attempting to round up Palestinians to prevent them from actually having any type of political mobilization in areas under their control, arrest in Al-Khalil, arrest in some parts of Nablus, in some areas in Jenin, and so on, because that's their role, is to actually maintain a lid on the political mobilization and the power of the Palestinians. 18. Every colonial project sought and enticed a minor segment of the indigenous population and appointed it as chiefs, entrusted to sign away the rights of their own people first, and use more intense violence, torture, and constant arrests to keep everyone in the colony in line. This is the only way for us to understand the Palestinian Authority in the current structure. They are not in the business at this point to seek the liberation of the Palestinians. They are in the business of actually keeping the lid and keeping everyone inside the Palestinian territories and Palestine again in line. 19. Europe and the United States have succeeded in projecting a non-stop conflict in the modern post-colonial plantation called the Middle East and their role is to be the enforcers and civilized mediators, keeping Jews and Muslims from killing each other while selling weapons to all sides. Right? So you're gonna get all like Secretary of State Blinken today stand up and he say he wanted everybody to calm down, as if what you call you're having, you need a 12-step program. Again, the Arabs are just like, we're so emotional and we can't respond, so we just need to calm down to reduce the tension. So this word tension, it's a complete obfuscation of what's taking place. Here's the Israeli settler colonial apartheid system coming and slapping the Palestinians on non-stop inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, attacking the worshippers who are praying, trying to actually give permission to the Israeli nationalists that were marching with death to the Arabs a few days ago, to give them permit to actually march inside and within the neighborhood, especially the area of Bab al-Amud, which is at the heart of the Arab East Jerusalem. This is not a march for what you call celebrating whatever heritage culture you have. This is a march that is for taunting the Palestinians, to actually tell them that we have power, that this is what we are. We're just gonna dominate you. We're gonna control you. We're gonna cause